has made it quite clear that if narco-terrorists, again, are trafficking illegal drugs towards the United States, he has the authority to kill them. And that's what this administration is doing.
In San Diego, California, a vessel once dedicated to relief work had been turned into a smuggling ship. A humanitarian couple, Abdul Rahman Bashir Wars, 54, and his wife, Dr. Marian Ali Dolaley, 52, who had long been celebrated for their compassion and leadership in aiding refugees, were at the center of a shocking investigation. 2,743 refugee and orphan children were missing, and 1.2 kilograms of fentanyl remained unaccounted for. At 5:18 a.m., while the city lay asleep beneath the cold ocean wind, a convoy of federal black SUVs pulled up outside the headquarters of the Global Children's Relief Foundation. Within moments, more than 40 FBI and DHS agents executed a coordinated operation targeting the couple's private executive office. The Wars had a high-profile public image. They had addressed congressional committees 19 times, appeared at 7 international forums, and their foundation claimed to support over 14,000 refugee children across 3 continents. Major media outlets hailed them as guardians of displaced youth, and donors proudly repeated, "They are entrusted with the future of thousands of children." Yet beneath the accolades and applause, federal investigators discovered a troubling pattern. Programs connected to the couple's international travel exchange network were linked to the disappearance of thousands of children. Documents revealed repeated cases in which children listed as participants in the foundation's educational programs had left, but no records ever showed them returning. For over 5 years, the organization reported revenues exceeding $310 million annually. Yet its financial statements shifted constantly without explanation. Travel logs uncovered recurring private sea routes, not to refugee camps or aid centers, but to remote, unmonitored ports across the Pacific. To the public, these were just numbers. To federal investigators, they were glaring warning signs. While the world saw a symbol of humanitarian virtue, analysts began to recognize a darker reality. Beneath the celebrated couple's public image lay a legacy far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Confidential audits showed the foundation had processed more than $286 million in international aid funds over 5 years. Yet nearly 41% of those transfers flowed through phantom programs. No schools, no classrooms, no verified students. Paperwork existed, but it led nowhere. Instead, intersecting with commercial brokerage networks in Shenzhen and Guangzhou. Of more than 3,100 children listed, at least 2,700 had no documentation. Their tracking records were empty. Routine medical exams halted without explanation, and in many cases, their names were erased from digital systems as if they had never existed. Passenger manifests revealed repeated departures tied to the same international transport corridor, the same shipping agents, and the same time windows. What the public had seen was carefully curated. Investigators were beginning to uncover a humanitarian mask, concealing what would eventually be described as an industrial-scale human trafficking operation. Month after month, groups of children were moved aboard luxury charter yachts leased through third-party shell companies, departing after midnight from discreet coastal marinas in California, Washington, and British Columbia. Passenger lists described them as youth educational delegations, and each vessel's log recorded departure times, with every route ending at southern coastal ports in China. Intelligence sources uncovered something far more alarming. Encrypted communications linked members of the CJNG cartel previously monitored for narcotics, trafficking, and forced labor networks to these operations. The connection was deliberate. The network coordinated shipments of narcotics into the United States, including more than 1.2 kilograms of fentanyl, along transport corridors that overlapped with the yacht's routes. The pattern was consistent. Luxury yachts disguised as humanitarian relief vessels, projected groups of 450 children, and unregistered private hospitals in China as distribution points, with estimated black market profits in the billions. Federal agencies, after confirming each stage of the operation, concluded that this was no longer a simple charity audit or a review of financial records. It was the blueprint of an organized human trafficking network hidden behind the trusted public image of a powerful couple. On one voyage, at 5:41 a.m., the Pacific waters off San Diego were dark and silent when a large white yacht, Silver Dawn, cut through the waves 38 nautical miles from shore. Promoted on social media as a cultural enrichment journey for refugee children, The images showed smiling faces, banners, and promises of learning and hope, but beneath the surface, the truth was far more sinister. Inside the Federal Command Room, the truth was clear. Aboard the vessel were over 450 children, many without identification, guardians, or any trace in official records. They were not headed toward opportunity. They were being prepared for transfer. At 5:58 a.m., the order was given. The waters around the yacht shifted from stillness to coordinated motion as the U.S. Navy's rapid response vessels, USS Cole and USS Carney, closed in from starboard and port. FBI and intelligence tactical teams readied to board, while two MH-60 Seahawk helicopters hovered steadily on either side in the cold morning air. No warnings were issued. The operation had one goal: stop the ship before any child disappeared beyond reach. When federal floodlights illuminated the vessel, several men on the upper deck appeared with weapons, attempting to push the yacht forward. Gunfire erupted, not chaotic, not frantic, but controlled and deliberate. These were not volunteers or caretakers. They were enforcers. For 12 tense, breath-tightening minutes, the confrontation unfolded. Naval ships blocked the bow, engines stalled under pressure, and armed accomplices tried to hold their ground while the perimeter tightened. From above, the Seahawk helicopters deployed ropes, and federal agents descended onto the deck, moving carefully to reach the children below, who cried in confusion and fear. The crew attempted to block passageways and even build barricades within the corridors, but their resistance gradually faltered under the coordinated federal assault. Some crew members ran toward the cabin sections, with a few retrieving concealed weapons and firing from storage compartments. Meanwhile, Abdul Rahman Warsame and Dr. Marion Dwale, once praised worldwide as humanitarian leaders, moved toward the aft passage, not toward the children seeking escape. Inside the vessel, federal teams worked with calm precision. Cabins were opened, and children were gathered into secure areas, while medical personnel spoke softly, reassuring them with gentle words. Not a single child was injured or left behind. On the main deck, the final resistance collapsed. Weapons were lowered, armed men surrendered, and some dropped to their knees with hands pressed against the deck. By 6:12 a.m., 27 individuals were in federal custody, and 3 armed resistors were found unconscious in the narrow rear corridor under dim emergency lighting. The couple stood pressed against a bulkhead, attempting to hide behind a storage hatch. They said nothing, offered no protest. The applause of conference halls and the cameras were gone, leaving only silence. For the first time in years, no speeches were delivered. The two figures, once celebrated as protectors of children, were escorted across the deck under federal guard, while the very children they had abandoned were carried into the safe arms of the rescuers. What shocked investigators was not just the confrontation itself, but the vast network behind it. By 7:21 a.m., the gunfire had ceased, and the deck of the Silver Dawn was under full federal control. The cold Pacific morning was broken only by helicopter rotors and the steady movements of teams guiding frightened children into secure areas. Beneath the surface, agents discovered corridor after corridor of tightly arranged cabins, each containing stacked bunks, folded blankets, and lists taped beside the doors. Many lists included only first names and numbers, with no guardians, addresses, or legal records. In total, over 450 children were counted and verified on board. Many wore identical wristbands, had no luggage, and some did not know where they were being taken, revealing a hidden system far more organized and sinister than anyone had imagined. When questioned about who had authorized their journey, the children's answers were vague, confused, or painfully silent. Some believed they were traveling to study abroad. Others thought they were being adopted, and several had been told they were part of a cultural program approved by charitable sponsors. But there were no educational materials, no school coordinators, and no legitimate travel guardians. Instead, federal agents discovered a locked administrative storage room near the lower engineering cabin. Inside were 40 encrypted communication devices, ledgers marked with foreign transfer codes, multiple travel rosters linked to earlier voyages, and contact keys tied to offshore handlers in southern China. A separate compartment held 5 metal cases. 2 contained vacuum-sealed bundles of currency, 1 held high-value jewelry and payment contracts, another contained narcotics trace packets consistent with prior trafficking routes, and the fifth contained documentation from foundation donors, humanitarian endorsements, and program sponsorship reports, all listing the same children as beneficiaries of aid. Yet the names on those records did not match the manifest found on board, and many of those listed beneficiaries were already marked as missing in international systems. What had once seemed like an irregularity was now undeniable evidence. Outside on the deck, medical teams began examining the children individually, discovering that several were dehydrated and disoriented. The human toll of a meticulously orchestrated network finally revealed. Many of the children were exhausted, having been moved between multiple locations before boarding. The yacht never told why. Yet throughout it all, the crew, disguised as caretakers, presented the voyage as a humanitarian mission. They wore uniforms, used official language, and acted as though the entire system around them was legitimate. That was what unsettled investigators most. Nothing about the operation seemed chaotic. Nothing resembled a crime hidden in shadows. Everything was orderly, organized, and structured, designed to move human lives as if they were cargo. By the time the ship's lower levels were fully secured, the truth had become clear. This vessel was no accident, no isolated act. It was a single node in a vast network, hidden behind charity reports and official paperwork, powered by people who had convinced the world they were saving children, while quietly sending them into the hands of those who would profit from their disappearance. For such a system to operate so smoothly, someone had to be pulling the strings. By 8:10 a.m., while the Silver Dawn remained under strict federal protection, the investigation shifted from the ship itself to the machinery that had allowed it to function undetected for so long. Inside the Federal Command briefing room in San Diego, analysts reviewed years of internal records, travel authorizations, and port clearance approvals connected to the couple and their foundation. What had occurred was not coincidence, it was coordination. Over 5 years, more than 118 international departure requests had been approved under humanitarian categories such as youth exchange, temporary relocation, and educational transition support. Nearly every departure occurred during the same late-night inspection window between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., when staffing was lowest and oversight procedures routinely delayed. None of these departures were flagged. Not a single one was denied. When investigators traced the approval chains, the findings were deeply alarming. Several documents had been processed through private compliance consultants and third-party assessment firms hired to support international aid logistics, their signatures appearing repeatedly on cargo transfer papers, passenger exemptions, and maritime transport waivers. The more analysts reviewed, the clearer the larger picture became. This network survived not because it was invisible, but because too many people chose not to see it. Financial audits revealed consulting and advisory fees totaling over $92 million, funneled to shell organizations tied to port administration groups, legal review bodies, and overseas coordination offices. On paper, these payments appeared legitimate, labeled as risk evaluation, international coordination, and humanitarian infrastructure support. In reality, their sole purpose was to prevent scrutiny. Requests for secondary passenger verification were dismissed as unnecessary. Repeated late-night departures were labeled statistically insignificant, and customs officers who resisted were reassigned within weeks. Year after year, the pattern continued. Official emails retrieved from encrypted servers described the program as a priority humanitarian corridor, and certain cargo declarations were pre-classified as low risk, meaning no deep scans, no extended review, no intrusive inspection. These classifications applied to the very routes now linked to 2,700 missing children, hundreds of covert financial transfers, and a parallel flow of illicit activity. This was not bureaucratic failure. It was institutional permission. What troubled investigators most was not the money itself, but the mindset behind it. The individuals who reinforced this system did not see themselves as criminals. Those involved spoke in the language of efficiency, growth, partnership, and international cooperation, convincing themselves they were protecting programs, reputations, and stability. But stability for whom? Every unchecked approval, every softened report, every buried question carried a human cost. Children disappeared in silence, records closed quietly, and a humanitarian image masked a criminal network operating through offices, boardrooms, and polished institutions, not alleys or shadows. By the conclusion of the final briefing, one truth stood above all. This network did not operate beneath the system. It operated inside it, sustained by paperwork, protected by process, and upheld by people who found it easier to look away than confront the truth. By the afternoon, activity aboard the Silver Dawn had quieted. The noise of confrontation was replaced by softer sounds. Medical teams speaking gently, blankets being unfolded, children guided to seated areas on the upper deck under the morning light. There was no triumph, no celebratory language, only a steady, deliberate sense of responsibility. Over several hours, federal child services teams and medical personnel worked room by room, verifying identities and stabilizing the young passengers. Of the more than 450 children rescued, many could not describe the path that had brought them aboard. Some had been moved between shelters, others had crossed multiple borders, and several had been separated from guardians long before boarding. Cross-referencing records against international databases revealed a larger pattern. At least 2,700 children tied to earlier program transfers had never re-entered legitimate humanitarian systems over the past 5 years. Many vanished from school registries. Others disappeared after temporary sponsorship documents expired, and a significant number were never recorded again as students, residents, or refugees. To investigators, the numbers no longer represented statistics, they represented absence. Each missing record was a child without answers. Each missing name, a life erased. As analysts reconstructed the movement corridors linked to the Foundation, a darker reality emerged. These children had not been merely mismanaged. They had been absorbed into concealed pipelines, transferred through routes designed to erase their existence from oversight. Some were repeatedly shifted to prevent tracking, while others were listed under altered identifiers, leaving a trail of disappearances hidden beneath the veneer of humanitarian work. Some children left no trace beyond a single outbound manifest. The emotional weight of these discoveries did not arrive all at once. It accumulated slowly, quietly, as case logs hardened into undeniable fact. Parallel investigations confirmed that the network did not merely operate alongside criminal transport channels, it relied on them. Financial reviews documented hundreds of millions of dollars routed through layered accounts under the guise of humanitarian allocation. Those funds did not build schools, support shelters, or benefit the children whose names had justified them. Separate intelligence streams linked maritime routes to narcotics corridors, responsible for moving more than 1.2 tons of illegal substances over an extended period. The same vessels that carried the language of charity also carried the concealment strategies of organized trafficking. The damage extended far beyond numbers, reaching into communities. Social workers across multiple states reported unexplained child relocations, sudden dependency terminations, and abrupt record closures, all corresponding with the Foundation's timelines. Families who believed their children were entering protected programs had instead been cut off from oversight entirely. For those who survived the journey and were recovered, the road ahead would be challenging. Many required medical evaluation, legal guardianship review, and long-term psychological support to begin rebuilding their lives. Some children spoke little, others remained completely silent. Many were too young to comprehend what they had narrowly escaped. Investigators understood that justice would not be achieved in a single operation. It would take years of reconstruction, locating survivors, rebuilding records, restoring identities, and returning dignity to children who had been treated not as individuals, but as shipments moving through a system that called itself humanitarian. Inside the federal briefing room, one conclusion echoed repeatedly: this was not collateral damage. This was the purpose of the network. It existed to convert vulnerability into profit, to turn innocence into a resource, and to move lives through doors never meant to close. As the rescued children were carefully transferred from the deck of the Silver Dawn to protective custody, the teams understood that stopping the ship had halted the movement, but the work of healing and uncovering the truth had only just begun. By the end of the first 24 hours, the Silver Dawn was no longer crossing the Pacific. It was anchored under U.S. Navy escort, its deck secured, compartments sealed, and systems cataloged as part of a widening federal investigation. Warsame and Duale did not return to conferences or cameras. They were transferred under guard to the USS Coronado, where federal agents began the first stage of post-operation questioning. There were no speeches, no public statements, and no appeals to humanitarian authority. The interrogation room remained silent, and the records spoke louder than any defense the couple could offer. Within days, the investigation extended far beyond the Silver Dawn. Bank accounts tied to the Global Child Relief Foundation were frozen across 7 jurisdictions, and real estate holdings, foreign investment portfolios, donor trust reserves, and subsidiary program accounts were seized pending review. In total, more than $420 million in assets were placed under emergency federal control. None of the corresponding ledgers matched legitimate program spending. Behind every transfer was a trail of shell organizations, advisory partnerships, and consultancy fronts, all designed to disguise extraction as aid distribution. In multiple cases, the same authorizing signatures appeared across funding approvals, port access waivers, and international travel exemptions. These findings were not isolated, they were structural. Grand jury panels were convened under sealed proceedings, and charges extended far beyond mismanagement or fraud. Draft indictments spanned human trafficking, international conspiracy, financial laundering through humanitarian channels, obstruction of oversight procedures, and organized racketeering. Several cooperating witnesses were identified. Individuals once positioned inside compliance review offices, logistics, contracting firms, and advisory bodies tied to transportation and aid coordination. Their testimonies revealed a system that had not merely overlooked risk, it had normalized it. Analysts recovered more than 14,000 internal communications, outlining a language of operational caution, not to protect children, but to protect the foundation's image. Phrases such as "avoid disruption to priority partners" and "do not delay humanitarian throughput" appeared repeatedly across routing approvals, the same corridors tied to 2,700 missing children, overlapping narcotics routes, and concealed maritime transfers spanning multiple years. Meanwhile, oversight audits were launched at additional program hubs across 3 countries. Early findings revealed the same patterns: repetitive documentation practices, recurring contractor relationships, and low-risk classifications for passenger clearances conducted during late-night hours. Investigators realized this was no longer a single case. It was a replicable model, one capable of operating wherever institutions valued efficiency over scrutiny, reputation over accountability, and paperwork over truth. There were no public celebrations, no press conferences declaring victory. Inside the closed briefing rooms, the tone remained measured and solemn. Arrests, asset seizures, and indictments could not undo what had already been lost. Communities would spend years rebuilding trust. Survivors would navigate long recovery processes, and courts would move carefully because haste could never replace justice. Yet one fact remained clear: the pipeline had been severed. The vessel no longer sailed under the banner of charity. The financial machinery that sustained it no longer moved unchecked, and the facade that once shielded wrongdoing had been stripped away, replaced by documentation, evidence, and accountability. For those who had worked through the operation, the meaning was neither triumph nor closure. It was responsibility. Responsibility to tell the truth, to protect those who had no voice, and to ensure that silence could never again be mistaken for compassion. The greatest danger had not been the ship, the money, or the network itself. It had been the belief that a system built on trust could never be questioned. This case shattered that belief, leaving a clear and unspoken understanding. Humanitarian work demands vigilance, not admiration, and the cost of looking away is measured in lives. When the final reports were filed and the last evidence boxes sealed, there was no applause, no headlines declaring triumph. The operation ended not in victory, but in understanding. What had been uncovered was more than a criminal network. It was a warning of how easily trust can be borrowed, how institutions can be persuaded to look away, and how compassion can be misused when oversight is replaced by assumption. The children rescued that morning did not symbolize a closed case. They represented a responsibility that now belongs to every system meant to protect the vulnerable. The work ahead would be slow, deliberate, and measured. Restoring records, rebuilding safeguards, and ensuring that no title, reputation, or public image is ever allowed to stand beyond question. In the end, the greatest defense against injustice is not power, it is vigilance, and the courage to see,